The leads, the lies, the patterns, they all spiral down to this single point. I was standing in a field that felt forgotten by God. Above, the December clouds were a suffocating grey ceiling. Behind me, the winter wind howled like a wounded animal. I was just a witness now, standing before her memorial. I sat at my desk, revisiting one of this city's most notorious open wounds, the subject of my next investigation. Then, a notification blinked on my screen. Another man missing. Bristol's floating harbour, near the Arnolfini, in the dead quiet of November 23rd, around 1 a.m. They initially reported him simply as Rehaan, just a fragment of an identity. But on this channel, we understand that names are often just camouflage for something else. There is a system of codes and ciphers embedded within language. I wrote down the name. Using the simple alphabetic order, the sum was instantaneous, 47. To the uninitiated, it's just a number. To a numerologist, it is as clear as a shouted word. 47 is the fingerprint of a secretive order, the Freemasons. The great architects of the medieval world who imbued the very stone they stacked with hidden ratios. Their most sacred geometry is found in the 47th problem of Euclid, a formula derived from their predecessor, Pythagoras, used to build perfectly square foundations. In the Pythagorean system of numerology, where letters are numbered 1 through 9, the word foundation itself sums to 47. It is why their most potent symbol, the compass, is depicted open at a precise 47-degree angle. It is not just math, it is a signature of ownership. The grim confirmation came a day later. Divers recovered his body on November 24th, and with the discovery came the full truth of who he was. Rehaan was a serving constable with South Wales Police. This is where the pattern turns truly sinister. Look at the police uniform. The checkerboard band that wraps around it. That is Masonic symbolism, hidden in plain sight on the agents of the state. They are, at their core, a Masonic fraternity, and like all the old orders, they operate by letter and number. Simply write the word police. Apply the Mason's cipher. It sums to 33. The 33rd degree, the highest, most shrouded level of Freemasonry. So when the somber day of his funeral arrived on November 28th, I knew before I even checked the calendar what I would find. November 28th is the specific date that leaves exactly 33 days remaining in the year. A police constable, bound by the number 33, buried on the day of the 33rd. And now, finally armed with his full name, and knowing the appropriate cipher to apply, we have to look at what the final code reveals. The first 4 digits of the crime reference number for his disappearance are particularly significant. The number 3, it isn't just a digit to them, it's intrinsic to their entire structure, the root of it all. The 3 degrees, the 3 lesser lights, the 3 great pillars. I dug deeper into the files, looking for the resonance of that specific date, and the city did not disappoint. It offered up another name, Luis Piovesana, another man taken by the water. Not the harbor this time, but the river Frome, that dark, subterranean artery that snakes beneath the city's concrete skin. He was found on that same sacred date, March 3rd, 3/3. But it was the details of his final moments that made the blood freeze in my veins. Before the river took him, Luis made one last desperate call for help. He contacted the police, the very fraternity we know wears the checkerboard of the 33, claiming someone was actively trying to kill him. The time of that final call? 3 minutes past 3, 3:03. He was last seen on CCTV at 3:30 a.m. My eyes drifted back to the old files, and back to the horror I had been revisiting. And there it was again, staring me in the face. A date pulsating with that same grim numerology, March 3rd, written simply as 3/3, the specific date that leaves exactly 303 days in the year. That was the day the search ended. And here is where the fabric of coincidence tore completely, revealing cold machinery beneath, a striking synchronicity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I laid the files side by side, Becky Watts, Luis Piovesana, separated by years, by circumstance, by the horrific nature of their ends. Yet, the city had bound them together with iron chains. They were both found deceased on the exact same day of the calendar, March 3rd, the sacred 3/3 of the builders. But the connections spiraled deeper, down into the city's subterranean geography. Luis was physically pulled from the dark waters of the river Frome. And Becky? I looked at her name again. I ran it through the ciphers, forward and reverse, as the old orders do. It was a perfect anagram of River Frome. This demanded further investigation.
Bristol teenager Becky Watts, who was found dead in March after a huge police search operation, was suffocated, police have revealed. The statement came as hundreds of people, including...
I'm dying, Dad. I can't breathe, Dad. I can't breathe.
I have an update on the Becky Watts investigation. As a result of new information received late last night, we attended at a house at Barton Court in the Barton Hill area of Bristol. The information suggested that Becky's body had been cut up, and a search at the new location resulted in the discovery of body parts.
The map, the whispers, the cold facts. They all led me here. Not a choice, not truly. More like an old current, pulling me back to where the rot runs deepest. This time to Bristol's Barton Hill. I keep finding myself in places like this. Places the city tries to forget. Places where the shadows lengthen and refuse to retreat. It always begins the same way, a question. A persistent ache to understand the geometry of despair. The unseen forces that twist lives and leave a trail of blood. There's a story here, beneath the broken glass and the faded promises. A tangled mess of lies, betrayal, and something older, darker, at work. And I'm here because something demands it. Something needs to be understood. Even if the understanding is a poison.
The investigation into the disappearance of Becky Watts is now a murder inquiry. All day, forensic teams have been at work inside this house in East Bristol, and a tent has been erected over the garden. On the other side of the city, officers are combing a second property, and at her home.
You don't start an investigation by looking at files.
It's 11 days since the 16-year-old went missing.
You start by breathing the air.
Were arrested. Police have now-
Every district in this city has its own ghost, its own specific gravity. And the atmosphere in Barton Hill, it's oppressive. A heavy, clinging weight you can feel in your lungs. It's a remnant of its dark industrial past, a past that hasn't finished dying. The giant tower blocks do their part, casting long shadows over the streets. They stand on the graves of what came before, the result of a great purge that swept away the maze of terraced streets, the old slums that housed the poor. Those houses were huddled beneath the steam and soot of Brunel's great cotton factory. A vast, grinding machine that consumed the lives of its workforce. A place where generations of women and girls toiled, their hopes choked by the same cotton dust that filled the air.
New homes for the people of Barton Hill. That's why the old ones had to come down. The narrow, crowded streets where cotton workers and railwaymen had lived for more than a century were in decay. For the new generation, there must be more room to breathe. For them, the clean high life of the modern flat dweller. But changes have come slowly, and there's been a heavy price to pay. At times, it seemed that the years of desolation between breaking and building would never be over. And for the families of the old Barton Hill, only a mile from the centre of Bristol, yet grouped in a close community more like a village than a town, it's been like living through a slow earthquake. The rumbling goes on, and the dust takes years to settle. Some who moved out to suburban housing estates while the new blocks of flats were taking shape will never come back. The place is as strange to them now as to the survivors who stayed on in the little Victorian houses at the edge of the wasteland.
They tore down the Victorian slums only to build concrete ones, erecting the tower blocks in the 1960s. Barton House was the first, the city's oldest experiment in vertical living. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and a £50 million reinvestment into the district. A new deal that did little but gloss over the rot. The freshly painted walls just offered a blank canvas for new graffiti. The new streetlights only served to illuminate the same old crimes. And the underpasses, flooded and forgotten, became a breeding ground for vermin. It was against this canvas of crime, poverty, and failed experiments that one of the city's most horrifying crimes found its stage. The final, grotesque chapter in the murder of Becky Watts. The crime scene was 10 years old, not a cold case. The books were closed, the verdict delivered a decade ago. A killer within the family, a wolf amongst the sheep. But it didn't sit right with me. It felt like a scab over a wound that was still festering underneath. In the cold light of day, Barton Hill didn't seem so bad at first glance. A maze of quiet, terraced streets, the kind that felt almost sleepy. Graffiti scarred the brickwork, scrawled names, faded obscenities. It felt like the standard decay of a forgotten place. But then you looked up. Above the modest rooftops, they loomed. The giant tower blocks. Those towers had seen their problems. This area was bleeding, soaked in a generational poverty that the city just tried to paint over. The drug gangs had taken up residence in the high-rises, claiming the vertical territory, and they attracted their own kind of ghosts. Men drifted through the streets below, tethered to this place by addiction. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollowed out by something hungrier than the winter cold. I remember the bulletin from June 6, 2023. The public health officials sounded the alarm. A bad batch had hit the streets of East Bristol. 6 people dead, just like that. To anyone else, to the news anchors reading the teleprompter, it's just another sad statistic in a forgotten neighborhood. A predictable tragedy, but I've learned to look at the dates. I checked the calendar. June 6th. It was the 187th day of the year. You hear it in movies, in rap songs, the universal street code for homicide. The author of this book about Becky's murder, titled The Evil Within, seems keenly aware of this code. Beneath the grime, beneath the casual despair of the gangs and the junkies, I felt something else. Our last investigation took us to the quiet fringes of Sea Mills, where we learned to extract secrets from the cold stone and stained glass of a seemingly unassuming church. We learned that in this city, even holy places can be markers for the unholy things buried beneath. So, I decided to begin here, at St. Luke's, Barton Hill's own silent sentinel. It had history. The records say it was built upon an old plague burial site, long before the architects arrived to raise the great towers of stone and iron that now loom over it. The church stood here when this was all fields, and it stands here now, a stone witness. If the ground remembers, St. Luke's is the headstone. Barton Hill was born from the water. The feeder canal, cut to serve the floating harbour, paved the way for the Great Western Cotton Factory in 1837. With the mill came the slums, meagre terraces warehousing 2,000 souls. The factory owners, seeking to manage this exploding population, commissioned the schools and the church. St. Luke's didn't rise from simple faith. It was an industrial necessity, built by the directors to house the spirits of those they worked to the bone. I tracked the history of the foundation stone. It wasn't consecrated by prayer alone. The ceremony was attended by the Freemasons. Freemasonry has existed here since the first ships docked, its secret lodges forged in back rooms off rain-slicked streets. This city is so deep in the craft, it even has its own unique strain, a specific rite known as the Rite of Baldwin, also known as the Rite of 7 Degrees. I'd established a strong Masonic presence here. Every piece of their dark geometry slotted into place. Barton House. Bristol's first tower block, not just a building, but a symbolic foundation reaching for the sky. It was evacuated, its residents spilled onto the streets, all for an apparent structural fault that never materialized. The date? November 14th. The day leaving precisely 47 days in the year, the very number of structure and foundation. A ritual. A public declaration of control. And in the very shadow of that building, that concrete monument to their authority, lies the quiet, unassuming courtyard. The place where Becky's remains were finally found. On that grim, numerically coded day of March 3rd. Becky Watts and Luis Piovesana, both bound to the same date, one physically claimed by the River Frome, the other linguistically named after it. It was a knot in my stomach. I knew the Barton Hill crime scene had long since grown cold, the evidence scoured clean, the ground taken over by weeds and time. I'd have to use other resources. The archives, the digital shadows.
Say this is a family who have handled themselves with utter dignity.
Fiona, thank you very much. Fiona Lambden reporting there. Now, Becky was first reported missing by her dad back in February this year. It led to one of Avon and Somerset Police's biggest investigations.
My education isn't just in the occult. I read the living too. The news anchor, solemn in his suit, delivering the official line. He stated that the Watts case was one of the police's biggest investigations. But as the words left his mouth, he gave a shake of his head, the body language for no. I hit the replay again, watching his eyes flicker just below the camera lens, perhaps reading a hidden prompt.
It led to one of Avon and Somerset Police's biggest investigations. At its height, hundreds of police officers searched dozens of locations across Bristol. It ended when Becky's body was found in a shed just metres from Matthews and Hawes' home. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Steve Brodie.
It was on the morning of Thursday, February the 19th, that Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hall decided to drive to Becky's house. It was on the morning of Thursday, February the 19th.
She was murdered on February 19th. I stared at the date on the board until the numbers started to swim. The day she was taken. The day the silence descended on the house. February 19th is the cusp, the precise moment the celestial wheel turns to Pisces. The domain of the deep, the sign of water. And the ruler of Pisces, Neptune, god of the sea. The hidden namesake of this drowning city, whispered in symbols and ciphers. A year later, there was a report. Someone had set fire to her mural. It was just a splash of colour in a grey park, a place for memory, but they burned it anyway. The paper claimed it was children, but I sensed something more sinister. I had to know. I looked at the date. The article was from November 19th, 2016. But the fire was lit on the Thursday, November 17th. I checked the calendar. 2016 was a leap year. The year was stretched, distorting the count. If there were secrets here, they were buried in that broken time. I counted the days. It was the 322nd day of the year, 322. It means one thing: a ritual tribute to Moloch. I remember the child devourer investigation. The files are still in my head, burning like embers. We talked about it then. The ancient hunger that demands the young, the fire that consumes innocence. It's not for me to say if ancient demons exist. Real or not, there are people amongst us who worship them and are willing to act on their beliefs. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. It shattered the silence I'd built around myself, echoing too loudly in the small room. I wasn't expecting a soul. It was just the postman, or someone wearing the uniform. But it wasn't the usual man. This one was different, unknown. Since learning of the horrors that lie beneath the mundane, I have to question everything. A uniform is just a costume. A delivery is just an approach. When you know the city feeds on specific dates and hides behind the mask of public service, a stranger on your doorstep isn't just a visitor, he's a variable. I sifted through the digital debris, pulling up another file. This one made my skin crawl. It was an article about her death, but it was the video embedded within it that stopped me cold. It showed her alive, vibrant. She was eating spicy food, laughing through the pain, framed like some innocent social media challenge or a dare among friends. But listening to it, it felt like a sick premonition. Her words echoed the terrifying reality of her final moments. It was a ghost story told by the victim before the crime had even happened. And then I looked at the timestamp. The editor didn't just cut the clip at a random moment. The video was trimmed to precisely 47 seconds. It was a splinter in my mind, festering. It had stalked me through every alley and every dead end of this case, a ghost refusing to be exorcised. The puzzle still had a hole in it. There was one last truth I had to drag into the light. The leads, the lies, the patterns, they all spiraled down to this single point. I was standing in a field that felt forgotten by God. Above, the December clouds were a suffocating grey ceiling. Behind me, the winter wind howled like a wounded animal. I was just a witness now, standing before her memorial. The investigation had dragged me through the dark, only to leave me here, in the cold, looking at what was lost. I knew its history, a few days short of the 1-year mark. A memorial bench was unveiled in the park where she used to play. The city council had arranged the tribute. Family and friends gathered there that day, standing in the cold, somber, admiring the craftsmanship. It was solid oak, heavy, permanent. The wood was intricately carved with feathers and angel wings, branded with the phrase "Bristol's Angel," a wooden altar sanctioned by the city. They unveiled it on the 16th of February, the 47th day of the year. The wood had a story. It wasn't just oak, it was wreckage. Driftwood salvaged from the grey tides of sea mills. The name stuck in my throat like ash. Sea mills. I knew the place, and I knew the secrets that washed up on its shores. But it was what they'd carved into the back of the bench that was of most interest. An ornate unicorn. The city's emblem, as we've already learned, it is more than heraldry. It is encoded with Neptune's own dark numerology. Her favorite animal, a simple truth for the family. But in this light, it read like a signature. She wasn't Bristol's angel. She was Neptune's angel.